Primarily, I've been using, me and Paul and the rest of our guys internally have been using just the 64-bit, and it's awesome. So I've had models that in the current version of ZBrush that I had to load in parts, just from all the subtools, and now I'm able to load them all in and spin them around flawlessly. So it's really night and day with the 64. I didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal. I was like, okay, yeah, I got a few cores, but it's awesome. So the scene you're seeing here was actually done all inside of ZBrush and then sent to KeyShot to render. So this is going to be one of the things I'm going to talk about quickly on just the process of creating this. And there will probably be a bunch of tutorials on a similar subject after the release to correspond afterwards. So you get to hear my voice again on ZBrush Central there. So that's going to be the one we're going to do today. And then also I'm going to cover some of the engine stuff. So if you guys have not seen the engine, let me just load up an image of that quick. So this way you guys can gauge your time, since it is Sunday and it's the end of the show. So we'll be going over some of the engine stuff to show the KeyShot stuff off, and then how I made some of the forest elements. And then I'm going to give you guys a brief little intro on the ZModeler brush and how it kind of works. So that's what we'll be doing in today's demo. So to start off, we have a new version of the brush, which is the ZModeler brush. So if I hit B on my keyboard, you'll see down here now is a ZModeler brush. So this is just integrated in your brush menu, so you can use all your hotkeys to kind of access this. And this brush is context sensitive. So when you hover over different parts of your actual model, you're going to get a description of what process you can actually apply to that area. So this allows you to hover over polys, edges, and then also points. Now with each of these areas selected or hovered over, if you press down spacebar on your keyboard, you're going to get this ZModeler menu. And in here you have a series of actions at the top, and then you have a series of targets, and then you have a series of modifiers. Now these actions and these targets correspond to how you're going to actually get these processes to perform as you're going across your model. And we've gone the route of allowing you to access these different targets, and this allows you to not have to do any selections. So if I want to actually come through here and use this QMesh action on this whole flat face here, instead of coming through and having to select that face, I can come and just set my target to something like flat island. And now when I process, ZBrush is going to look at this entire flat surface of the model here, and it's going to just perform the action to that area. So as a difference, that was the flat island. And then if I come over to just a single poly and apply that process, you're going to notice it's only going to do that one polygon. So this process of these targets here will allow you to quickly come through and just select targets and then just apply the action to it and not have to create any selections with it. Now, since this is context sensitive, as you hover over each one of these, you're going to get a different ZModeler menu. So I'm hovering over the edge action now. So I have a different version of the ZModeler here that's just exclusive to the edge functions. So in here I can set whichever function I want. And then when I hover over an edge, it's going to update with that function. So right now this is set to insert edge loop here. So I can just come across any edges of the model and just click and drag, and I'm going to insert an edge loop. Now we have, pretty much all the functions you could possibly want. There's always more, but we have quite a bit of functions in here. So, we can insert a single edge loop, and then as an example, we also have the option for multiple edge loops. And this you control a whole other set of modifiers down here that allow you to control different results you're going to get from these actual edge loops. So now with multiple edge loops selected, if I come over this part here, I just click and then start dragging, it's going to allow me to generate multiple edge loops. You also have the option with this mode, if I hold shift, it's going to constrain it to a flat insert of the edge loops. But if I release shift, I'm going to actually be able to deform the geometry like this. So really powerful stuff you're going to be able to do on your models with just simple strokes and simple actions inside of ZBrush. The point menu is the same. So if I hover over a point, you get an actual point menu here. And you have interesting items like the split point here, which allows you to come through and generate splits on your mesh really fast. And then along with the polygon actions here, you also have an option for an alternate or temporary polygroup to be assigned. So if you are used to kind of acquiring selection sets and things like that on your model, if you hold down Alt, it's going to assign this white polygroup to your mesh. Now this will work with in and out of actual symmetry. So right now I turned symmetry off, so I'm going to tag this face here white, and then I'm going to tag this face white over here. And now if I apply in an action, this QMesh action here to this poly, you see it's going to apply to both those areas. So this will allow you to come through and just tag any areas on your model that you want to apply the same effect to, and then just clicking and dragging is going to apply that same process everywhere. So it's really handy in getting exact kind of things across multiple areas on your mesh. Another really nice thing about the ZModeler brush here is it has an option to also replay last, or repeat the last action that was applied. So if I come over and I QMesh this poly out, but now say I want to pull this one out the same length or pull this one out the same length, I don't have to really click and drag out again and try to match it up. I can just come over and just click, and it's going to apply that same process that way. So I can just come through and quickly apply that same depth that I just stroked for that first one on other areas of my model. So another extremely handy process there. And this works with the majority of all the ZModeler functions. So if I come to split and do that nice circle, and this is, say, the standard circle I want all my circles to be that size, I can just come over another point and click, and it's going to give me that exact shape. So another little handy thing there to kind of come quickly and do that to your meshes. Another really cool one that I end up using quite a bit is the bridge connected polys function. And this allows you to create arcs and circles on your meshes or edges. So if I come over here, we have this bridge to poly function selected here. And I see as I hover over this poly here, I'm getting this kind of red line that's going around a circle. This is going to determine where this actual bridge function is going to be applied. So if I have this line pointing down, it's going to actually bridge this poly and this poly together and give me this nice arcing shape. Now if I press spacebar on this, you can see I have a whole bunch of different options to actually generate modifiers to actually affect this bridge connected polys functions. So I'm just going to come here and change a few. I'm just going to make my poly grouping flat and just turn on triangle sides. So now if I come over here and just click and drag out, you can see it's going to start bridging that. And then scrolling up and down with my mouse, I'm going to actually start getting a tessellation based on my mouse movement. So this allows you to get nice circular shapes on your models. Now using that replay function again, instead of me trying to come over here and redo it again, all I have to do is come over and just click, and it's going to apply that exact same thing. So really easy to get very interesting shapes like this extremely fast. This one corresponds really well with the process of insetting as well. So I'm going to come over here and just select inset. I'm going to do flat island. And then I'm going to do an inset region. So right now you have an option with the inset. You can do an each poly or an actual inset region. So for this one, I'm just going to do the region, which is going to give me this entire area. So as we talked about with the actions and the targets, I have inset set selected as my polygon action. My target is flat island, and my modifiers are inset region. So what this is going to look, wherever I click, it's going to look at the flat island. So this whole area here is going to be affected. And when I do this inset, you see it's going to inset that actual edge there really nice, right? So just come through and give me something like this. And then to repeat on the other side, just hover around and click, and I'm going to get the exact same result. Now, if I want to punch a hole through this mesh really quick, this QMesh action is awesome. It actually has a whole bunch of functionality. So the main functionality is that it will perform a weld function whenever you do an action with it. So if I come over here and just QMesh and press inward, it's going to weld the other side, and I'm going to get a nice punched hole through there. And there's no needing to weld anything on here. It's taken care of all that welding for you. So you have nice, clean geometry. So I could send this to a 3D printer right now, and it's going to print fine because it's all 100% watertight. We didn't break the geometry doing that little hole there. Another option with this QMesh function is that it has a control and shift features as well. So if I click on this poly here and pull it off, if I hold shift, it's going to perform a move action. So I can come through quickly and say tag this area here, and then shift and get a move action really quick on my model. If I want to duplicate these faces, say I want to separate them off and make its own geometry, I can apply this QMesh action again, and while applying it, if I hold control, it's going to separate that face right off. So now you say, well, you've got this floating polygon here, but I want to kind of give it thickness. Well, to do that, you just need to come over and QMesh it again, and now you have that thickness applied, and it's come across your model there. So you can see how this kind of process allows you to come through and really control different assets of your model and get these base shapes, these starter shapes, or even final assets generated extremely fast. So coming back to this guy here, I'm just going to do a little edge border here. So using the Alt selection, just grab this, and then say I just want to move that in a little bit. So I can just use the QMesh function and get a little shape like that. So really interesting little things can be designed very quickly like this. Another thing we've added is we have the dynamic subdivision process. And originally in the stuff we showed at the summit, we just had basically the smooth subdivision process. So this just allows you to come in and basically if I hit divide, it's giving you the same kind of result, but it's doing dynamically. So I have a mesh right now with no lower or higher subdivisions, but it's giving the appearance of a high subdivision model. So this allows you to come through and kind of preview your actual model and shape like so. And this works really well with creasing. So I can hit Shift-D to toggle out of that mode. And now if I come across my edge here and say I want this edge to be harsh, I can actually come over here and there's a crease option here. And just come crease these areas. And now when I hit D again to go back in that dynamic subdivision node, you're going to notice I have a nice creased edge. So I didn't have to do any edge bumping of the geometry through this area. I just literally told ZBrush I want to crease this edge, and then when I actually use the dynamic subdivision, it's going to give me this effect. So this also works really well with the auto creasing down here, which allows you to specify an edge tolerance and then apply creasing to your model. So if I come over here and change this tolerance to say something like 45 and then apply creasing, it's going to crease the entire surface of the mesh there. So now I have this area looking really nice and round through here, and then I still have these squared parts on my model. And you can always come in and customize the actual areas there. So if I find that I don't really want this to be harsh, I can come and use the actual uncrease option by just holding Alt, and now I have a nice rounded shape. So really fun stuff there. Now, in addition to that just smooth subdivision mode here, we have another mode. Let's see if I have this metal here that'll look a little bit better. So show it off a little bit more. We have a function of this grid system, and this is going to come through and allow you to apply bevels to your model. So let me just go and get just a simple box again. Just cube this guy out. So with this functionality, if I have this version of the dynamic on, I have this grid system. And in here you have options for bevel, chamfer, and also constant and a coverage. So if I come over here and just turn bevel and constant on and then change this coverage here, turn off my polyframes, you're going to notice I'm getting a nice bevel generated across my model. So this is still the same low polygon mesh, right? I haven't changed any of the geometry on it. It's just generating and rendering it at this nice resolution. So now you have this nice box that's already beveled. Well, now I can come through and use the QMesh function on my model and keep describing the form out on the model here, and it's still going to give that nice kind of high quality bevel polygon. And at any time I can change this on the fly and start coming in and start detailing this out, just adding different elements. Turn my wires back on here. And just adding different effects on my model. Let me switch back to the actual insert here. And the context-sensitive stuff, just hover over and click. And you just get those areas kind of polished out. So if I want to add some edge loops here, just come and do that really quick. And then say I want to make a little bit kind of a chamfered effect right here. So I'm just going to QMesh this and then QMesh it down. And I have that nice kind of look on the surface of the model there. So very fast kind of workflows. And this shape I love. I love making this little shape through here. It's really quick. And then those rounded ones that I showed you guys earlier. So another thing that's really nice with these is if you guys are using ZBrush already, you can really use this process to make insert mesh pieces. So I've gone through and just generated a whole bunch of these kind of shapes with actual insert meshes. So I have this whole brush built along these shapes that are modeled with the ZModeler brush. So all these objects here are just quickly modeled using the ZModeler, even these areas here. So this is where I use that split point functionality and push the objects in. Now right now I have creasing that's stored along all these edges here. So if I come actually to my geometry and turn on my dynamic subdivision mode and turn off QGrid here, it's going to give me that rounded result. So basically I just spent time modeling this low resolution version of this model, but when I actually place it on my model and then apply this dynamic subdivision, it's going to give me this high poly result. So all these all have that same kind of similar setup, and you can see I have all sorts of different little assets I've generated with this effect. So things like this, you're talking about minutes to come through and get this shape. It's very simplistic. Like I'm not talking about a lot of geometry here, but just with the creasing and the dynamic subdivision, you're going to have a very clean result. So after you have all these kind of generated, I can just turn this easily into a brush here. And so same process, going brush, create insert multi-mesh. And now if I go back to my model right here, I just come through here and add these details using this as an insert mesh brush. So pressing M to select which kind of parts I want. So say I want to add, we're going to add the day. Let's pick one. Maybe this guy. So now I can apply that to my mesh. And depending on which mode or functionality I have on the model, I'm going to get a different result for the actual dynamic stuff. So really cool functionality there. Now, if I go back to, I can find it here, this forest image right here. So we're talking about how this was all done in ZBrush. And one of the things that's really powerful about this new functionality is the NanoMesh. And I love NanoMesh. It's one of those things that once you start messing with it, you get addicted to it and you just can't stop. So this entire surface, all these grounds and all these things were all done with this NanoMesh geometry. And this allows you to take a single object or a single piece of topology and create randomization across surfaces, which will give you surface details. So my base meshes for this entire scene are just basically planes. We're talking about very low geometry planes. So I first went in and just generated a plane, and then I generated trees, right? And I did the trees with this NanoMesh function. So I made a very small stick tree, and then just NanoMesh it on top of the plane, which gave me my forest kind of look all through here. And then after this was done, I threw it into KeyShot to get my camera lock, and then I came back into ZBrush and kept adding pieces or details to this. So I'm going to go through how I just kind of made like the ground section on the actual model here. So one of the other things with ZBrush is that we've added the ability for your actual insert mesh objects to hold UV mapping. And then with this UV mapping being held on your insert mesh objects, this allows you to also have the nanomeshes hold texturing and UV mapping. So let me just open up my little meshes here. So for the forest, I was experimenting with scan data. So I live in North Carolina. We have a lot of pine trees and pollen. So I went outside and found some pieces of bark on the actual trees, and then I just scanned these guys in. So let me get out of this metal material here. So I made some quick needles. So these are some pine needles here. Very low-res geometry. These are modeled straight with the ZModeler brush and then just quickly poly-painted. And the poly-painting actually, I transferred over to a texture map, so they actually just have a texture map applied to it. And then the bark as well. These were scan data, and then they were decimated down. And I was able to keep these a very low resolution. So this right here, we're looking at less than 1,500 points here. And then let the texture map do the work. So these texture maps have like a higher resolution on them. So since I was bringing it into a scene and I was never going to see it at a distance of this, I wasn't really concerned with a very high resolution geometry. So that's why they're decimated down. Because the most I was ever going to get close to them was going to be about here. And at this distance, you can't see that decimation effect at that level. So just going through and kind of making these a little more friendly. Now, this isn't to say that you could make them all high-res, because I did first have a version of this project that was actually completely high-res. So all these guys were high-resolution models, and they were decimated down with colorized information. And so the meshes themselves were very heavy. But these were all scan data objects, just plugged in and then processed here inside of ZBrush. So basically, I have this entire brush, and this is a pretty big brush of models. So I'm just going to convert this all to an actual NanoMesh brush. So first I need to convert it to an insert mesh, so an insert multi-mesh brush. It's going to go through and do that. Now if I hit M on my keyboard, you can see I have all these individual pieces lined up. So the insert mesh brush, when I told it I wanted it to be a multi-mesh insert mesh brush, it took every single subtool of my model and is now generated as a new insert mesh option. So now I have to have that created. I'm just going to come over and create a NanoMesh brush. Now this NanoMesh brush has this insert mesh brush now stored in it. So if I go back to, we're going to do it on an actual plane here. Find a plane quick. So if I go back to this model and then turn it into a polymesh 3D object. If I hover over the faces now, you can see this is acting just like a ZModeler brush. So basically it's a ZModeler brush with this NanoMesh now stored in it. So if I hover over any of these faces and press M, you're going to notice I'm going to load up this function again. So for a pine forest floor, we have a lot of pine needles, right? So I'm going to come over first and select a pine needle. Now with this, I'm going to apply these pine needles across the surface of geometry. So I'm just going to make sure I hover over a poly here and make sure I have insert NanoMesh selected. And you can come through and set your target to a specific thing. So if you just want to do it on one polygon, you have that option. If you want to do all the polygons, all the poly groups, you have a lot of different targets you can choose from. For this point, I'm just going to start with a single poly. So I'm just going to click and drag out. And you're going to notice it's going to give me that brush piece. But I want it to actually apply across the entire surface here. So I'm going to click and drag out, and it's going to apply that actual pine needle to every single one of those polygons. So now I have this pine needle, if I turn off my thing here, established across all that entire surface. Now right now, this is not looking like a pine forest at all, right? It's looking very repetitive, right? If you want to do a tiling texture, this might be good. But for like a forest floor, I want the randomization across that entire surface. So after I have this NanoMesh applied, this activates the actual options in the actual NanoMesh menu here. So here I have a whole bunch of variations I can actually apply to this surface here. First one right out the gate is show placement. Right now I have this nice kind of white square here, but I don't really want this white square showing in my render. There's no white squares in the forest. So I have the option to turn that off. Now I literally just have these pine needles across the floor here. Now with this, I have the options where, it was a little too even, so I can actually adjust the pattern distribution. Let me zoom in here a little bit so you guys can see this. So it's just randomly applying where these pine needles go. Now they're still going in the same orientation, right? So you have rotation variables, right? You can come through and set your rotation on these. You can also randomize the rotation. So if I come through and say set the rotation to say 180 and then set my random variable to 100%, you can see it's now rotated that pine needle randomly across the entire model there, right? So now I'm getting more of that look, like that pine floor in the actual pine forest. I can also adjust the density of that by increasing the amount of random seeds generated. So you can see if I wanted a dense mat of these pine needles, I can just adjust the seed here, and it's going to start getting that dense effect. I also have a randomization seed, which will come through and kind of randomize that area as well. So if I find out something's looking a little bit too tiled or too mimicked, I can come over there and change that setting there, and it's going to update it right there. And I'm actually going to switch to a different matte cap here. I'll actually go to skin shade so you guys can see this a little better. So now that I have this one area of the forest here generated, well, it's really flat as well. Well, with the NanoMesh active, I can now switch to any of my brushes, so any of my sculpting brushes. So if I go to, say, clay buildup here, and just increase my large brush size here, I'm actually come across, and I'm going to be deforming the actual plane that's under the geometry. So you remember when we turn off that show placement? I'm deforming this plane's geometry. And as I deform this plane's geometry, the actual nanomesh is going to be affected across that surface. So if I come over here and just start scrubbing, you're going to notice I'm changing that actual pine needles there. So now I'm getting a pile of pine needles on my floor, right? I'm no longer getting that nice flat plane. I'm getting a nice, better distribution of these meshes. And you can just keep going with this, and the nanomesh is automatically going to update on the fly there. So this gives you really nice abilities for generating environment scenes really quickly here inside of ZBrush. So now we were talking about kind of the layering of these actual surfaces. So right now I just have like a base layer of pine needles. But say I want to come through and throw some leaves on this, right? So I'm going to go back to my actual ZModeler brush here, and I went back to the one with the actual nano meshes stored in it. And now I'm just going to pick a leaf. So let's just pick this one. And now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to apply this across the surface of my mesh here. So I'm just going to come over a poly. You can see I'm just using that insert nanomesh over that poly there. And I'm just going to click and drag and then hold shift. And now you can see it's populated those leaves across all the surfaces of the model there. So once again, two tiling here. So I'm going to change the random distribution to get a random distribution of those leaves. I'm also going to change the size and maybe apply some random variations to these leaves here. If you apply them at 100% on the actual variations or an even amount through here, it's going to offset them evenly. So you can see I have one here that's really small, one that's really big. So 100 may be too much. We're going to do 50, 50, and 50. And now I have this kind of spread out there. I can adjust my seeds if they're looking too tiled there and maybe turn them down a little bit because you don't want that many leaves all over the forest. They're also right now embedded in these pine needles a little bit, so I need to come through and offset just some. So I don't want them, not all of them embedded. Some of them are okay, but I don't want all of them. And then I can change the random value on that to get a kind of offset like so. Then we talked about that rotation values as well, so we don't want all these leaves going the same way. So just adjusting that slider there to get a random distribution of that shape. So now you can see I can start layering these things up over top of the way. And so you can just come through, and actually for the forest floor, I went through and did a lot of variations on all this. And so for the actual image, I had different levels of things here. So I had a front plane that actually went through this middle part here. So this had 5 or 6 layers of these actual pine needles on the ground. And then it had the pine cones and the leaves and mushrooms and all sorts of other stuff. As this starts receding from the camera, I actually did another plane of geometry that didn't have as many of these insert meshes adjusted with it, which allowed, since it's fading into the background, I don't need to have 7 layers of pine needles on the floor because, you're not going to see it, so just reducing that down. At any time when you apply these nanomeshes too, you can switch back and forth between all of them using this index slider here, which will allow you to come through and just isolate one or the other. So if I just want to see what the leaves look like, I can just hide the other ones. If I just want to see what the pine needles look like, I can just hide that. You also have the ability to edit the meshes on any of this. So if I decide, hey, maybe this leaf, I need to bend it some, I can actually come through and just click edit, and now it's going to isolate that part and just give me the leaf by itself. So now I come through with any of the ZBrush tools in here. So say I just want to move this up, like I want a little more depth to this leaf here. Maybe it was too flat. So make my changes really quick, get out of edit mesh, and it's going to update across all those meshes. Now another thing that's really cool about this option too, and then I'll show you guys, I'll show you this while we're doing this, is that this all sends to KeyShot as well. So I'm not going to send this now because I've already got I've got the engine sitting in KeyShot right now, and it's been doing its thing in rendering and making it all nice and clean. So I'm not going to send it, but all this sends right over to ZBrush or KeyShot as well in one click. So it'll take all your nanomeshes here. So this entire forest was sent over as one chunk. So I had it all in ZBrush, all laid out with all different subtools and different nanomeshes across everything. One single button click took this and sent it right to KeyShot. And a lot of the materials in here, this is actually just the actual pure texture from ZBrush, so it will send all your texture information over. So each of these just had its own texture map applied, and then it was just sent over in Skin Shade 4. And that was the only thing that went to KeyShot, and I just rendered it in KeyShot. So I didn't adjust any materials once I actually got into KeyShot. So back to this with the NanoMesh function here. It's really cool to kind of do things like this as well. So I'm just going to take a plane of geometry here. Actually, we'll go back to this guy and undo this out. So if we think about, using the NanoMesh ability for like instant objects too. So say I have this shape here, and I want to break off a face. So I'm just going to come over and QMesh one of these objects here, and as I'm using the QMesh process, I'm going to hold Control to just break a single face out. And now I'm just going to apply a NanoMesh to this surface. Now this is some high level stuff here, so definitely just think about it, and then when you actually get the tools in your hand, just try to recall, because it's a really cool process. So I'm going to take, say, we'll go with the pumpkin. And I'm just going to insert a NanoMesh pumpkin right here on this object. So now I have a pumpkin on that face, right? But right now, it's only on this face. Well, say I want to put a pumpkin here, move it around, right? So right now, this polygon right here, the polygroup that's assigned to it is linking it directly to this pumpkin. So what this means, if I apply this polygroup anywhere on my mesh, it's going to actually apply a pumpkin to that area. So if I come through here, and I'm going to go down to the NanoMesh function here, and I'm first just going to hide this. I want to copy this polygroup. So inside the ZModeler brush, we have an option of polygroup right here. And this will allow you to apply polygroups around your different targets. So if you want to just come through and quickly apply polygroups to your model, or you can actually copy and paste this as well. So I know I want this polygroup. So I'm going to first hold and click, which will give it a new polygroup. But while I'm holding, I'm going to hold Shift, and that's going to copy that polygroup. So now I have this polygroup, the specific one here, that's linked to this NanoMesh stored in the ZModeler brush. So now wherever I click on my model, and if I have the polygroup action selected with a single poly, it's going to apply this polygroup. And as soon as I apply it, that pumpkin right here is going to go with it. So if I come back over here and just click on this face here, you can see now I have a pumpkin there. So what if I wanted a pumpkin on the bottom here? Now I have a pumpkin there. And these are all instanced, right? So this geometry of the pumpkin is instanced. Another thing you can do with this is you can come through and actually mask an area out, and then you can use the transpose line to duplicate that area there. So if I want to duplicate the pumpkin, I can just do that. And what I did was I'm actually duplicating that single face. I'm not duplicating the pumpkin. But since that pumpkin has that polygroup and has the pumpkin assigned to it, I can now deform that poly and rotate the pumpkin how I want it. Maybe rotate it this way, move it around a little bit. So now I have a free-form functionality of this pumpkin as an inserted object, but it's just literally a plane. And then if I don't want that plane, I can just turn it off, and now I can just free-form move this pumpkin around. And then since it is still a NanoMesh, I can also control the distribution of this stuff. So if I decide, hey, I don't have enough random distribution of the angles of this pumpkin, and I don't want to go and manually conform them, I can come over and start adjusting the rotation. So you can see now I'm getting a different variation. And since it's using this NanoMesh instance option, I can now make changes to the pumpkin. If I decide, okay, this pumpkin's too big, and I want to apply it across all of them, I can just come over here and quickly change the slider here for the scale, and it's going to update that pumpkin across all the surfaces there. So this is really handy if you have, objects on your characters. Say like, go back to the military type aspect, grenades, things like that. Make one grenade, apply it, or link it to a single face, and then you can move that face around and get that grenade everywhere on your model. And then if you need to make updates, changes, whatever, it's all in NanoMesh. So you can say come back and edit the original one at any time with just edit mesh, and then it'll update across everything. So really powerful functionality there. All right, so that's the NanoMesh stuff. I have the final version of this engine here. And this was all done with the ZModeler brush. And literally, I started from cylinders and cubes. And that was it. And just using these kind of tools we had for the cuts and insets and things like that, I was able to get to a result like this. And the process of this it's pretty enjoyable. Like, I'm really enjoying using the ZModeler brush. It's very creative. It's very fluid. And it's not feeling like I'm modeling. It's feeling like I'm just sculpting and doing things. And then coming across shapes and designs I like and just keep emphasizing or going around those. So if I come across these guys here and just isolate one of these little guys, you can see it's all this kind of geometry. So if I have dynamic subdivision on this, I think I do, or maybe not. I have a version with dynamic subdivision, but I merged my welds. So this right here, this carbon fiber, is NanoMesh using that same property. So I literally just took a area of that cylinder there that was making up the exhaust here, duplicated it out, and then applied a NanoMesh, and now I have this nice kind of fiber grating. And then the rest of the shapes, are various cylinders, cutting edge loops in, and using QMesh to kind of pull in and out the forms and shapes to get what I want. And then with these new tools, don't forget you can use any of the existing tools that are already in ZBrush. So these little welds here, all I did was come through and I QMeshed part of this model out to give me a clone of that shape. Then I QMeshed it again to give it thickness, and then I turned it into a DynaMesh and just sculpted, which generated those nice weld looks. So this brush works hand in hand with the additional sculpting stuff that's already inside of ZBrush. Another cool thing with the polyframes here, we've added the option to toggle line and polygroup fill on and off. So I don't know how many times you guys have worked, but like this is, it's getting pretty dense right here on the model because of all these nanomeshes in here. But if I just want to see what my polygroups look like, I can just literally turn off the lines of that area now, and now I just have my polygroup coloring. So if using the ZModeler brush, since a lot of the targets can be used with the actual polygroups, this gives you the ability to isolate areas but not have to see the entire lines or polyframes on your mesh. So it's really handy coming over there and toggling that on and off. Now I'm going to head over to KeyShot here. So this is rendering right now in real time. It's not an image. This is actually KeyShot rendering. Right now I have a few cores devoted to it. So ZBrush and KeyShot both use your actual processor cores. And so when working in tangent, so I'm going to come back here and just kind of minimize this down here. I usually end up working with KeyShot on one screen and then ZBrush on another monitor. And this has become like my daily routine. If I fire up ZBrush, I fire up KeyShot right next to it. So I have ZBrush here and KeyShot there, and I'm sculpting and sending stuff back and forth all day. Because the power of KeyShot in this bridge is that it's really fast, it's not slowing down your workflow, and it also gives you another perspective or another visualization of your model on screen. So you get another angle, you can kind of look around, see if things are looking good or looking wrong, and then make the adjustments, send it back over, look at it in ZBrush, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So it's a really nice workflow. So right now, this is the engine ready to go, and I'm just going to start sending stuff over so you guys can see this effect. So here I'm just have the exhaust here. I'm just going to send the exhaust over. The entire process to send this model over is like 2 minutes or so. Like it's huge. Like we're talking about, see how many millions of polygons this guy is. If I find it here. So that's 67 million triangles right there. Right? And that was sent in one click. So if I come over here, I'm just going to send this exhaust now. I'm going to first activate this process. So I'm going to come up to the actual render tab here. And to activate it, literally I just need to come to this external render tab and then just activate KeyShot right there. Now when this is active, when you actually hit BPR in here, it's going to send the model to KeyShot rather than doing a BPR rendering. So the hotkey for BPR rendering is Shift R. So you can just keep sculpt, hit Shift R, it's going to send it right to ZBrush, continue sculpting, and just get another different look of your model as you're working. You get another different fresh eyes or fresh view of the actual results. So I'm going to send this over really quick, and the KeyShot bridge will send whatever is visible. So if I just have this visible in my canvas, even if I just have part of this visible. So if I came through and actually hid part of my mesh like so, it's only going to send what is ever visible on the model over here. So what you see in KeyShot is what it's going to send. Or what you see in ZBrush is what it's going to send. So I'm going to click BPR. Now I do have Camtasia and some other things running just for this event here. So it's a little bit slower than it is when you just have these two guys alone on itself. And it's going to come through an update here in a second. And once you do your first send, after you have the first kind of send established, it does speed up as you actually work on your models. And so here we have this here, and camera locked. You can store different cameras in KeyShot, which is really nice. You can also toggle the locks. So if you have a specific view you want to hold, you can toggle it so you can't actively move it around or distort it. It also has all sorts of varying focal lengths and different perspectives. So there we go, that exhaust here inside of KeyShot. I'm actually going to move this down some. Now, another thing nice about the bridge is that it will also respect polygrouping or matte caps you have applied to the model. So I'm going to come over and just turn these matte caps on. So I have a set of matte caps that are applied to this mesh. And if I send this back over to KeyShot here, it should update with the materials I kind of already had pre-applied. CTN's getting crazy. End to CTN. Everybody's lining up, getting the freebies. So there we go. So you can see just by literally me coming through, and I actually went through the model and I've applied different matte caps to this. So KeyShot will form a bridge or a link between your matte caps you have in ZBrush and the materials you have applied inside of KeyShot. So anywhere I apply this kind of silver metal KeyShot on a model, ZBrush is going or KeyShot is going to know to apply this nice shiny metal. And anywhere I have this, I think it's like a, I think I'm using Framer 0 right here, Framer 4 for this carbon fiber there. It's going to automatically apply that carbon fiber. So you can come through and apply different areas of your model inside of KeyShot, KeyShot materials, or even just send the matte caps over right from ZBrush, and it's all going to hold. And then you come through and modify your model, change it, move stuff around, and it's going to update on the fly. Another really thing cool about KeyShot as well is if I come here over the material palette, one thing I really like using is the actual label system. So these kind of texture maps here are using a label system. So just have basically a label that you can come through and now position on the model wherever you want it. So it's really handy in like putting like logos or stuff. So Roush, they make Mustang parts, but they're also making plane parts or jet engine parts in my fictional render of this engine here. And then all the position and scale and stuff update as well. So if I just have this here, this little airfoil, just send that guy over really quick. As you can see, if you don't, not dealing with millions and millions of polygons, it's like instant. Like it's not even, like it's so fast how much it calculates over. So this is almost 1 million polys. And I don't know if you guys noticed, it was so quick there, but it only took like a second. Like there was no time down at all for it to get over. And the longer something sits inside a KeyShot, the clearer it kind of gets because it's a real-time render, and so it's rendering. So usually you want it to just kind of hang out over there for a little bit until it kind of clears up and gets the look you're looking for. So I'm going to scroll this all the way down to one here. Actually, let's see what else we got. I think I got an older version of this before I condensed my engine down. It initially had 156 subtool parts, and I can't remember if I I think I just only have the version here that's all together. So let's group split this. See if I can get my lower resolution version back out here. Can't remember which subdivision it was on. All right, so there we go. So once again, you can actively go back and forth. This isn't, restricted to anything. So, if I want to use the ZModeler brush on these areas here, say I want to add, something that pulls off like this, I can now make that change, send it over to KeyShot, and I'm going to see it update in real time. And this also just isn't limited to ZModeler, as I mentioned. So if I want to come through and actually apply some sculpting to this, so say maybe I want to divide this up a little bit there, and then maybe just come in and sculpt up on the mesh like this, quickly send it over, continue sculpting, send it over. And as you can see how fast that updates, right? So your process of going back and forth and getting the different look devs on this is a really fast thing here. And then if I like, a different matte cap on that, I can come and change and see what it's looking like. And now if I can come over here and sculpt again, it should send the update. So you can see now it's just replied this matte cap gray is this Amazon moss over here. So now if I duplicate or move this around or take another piece of it and say clone it. Oops, got some subdivisions there. I want 2 of them, send it back over. It's going to go right there. And it's going to hold that material. So really fast workflows with this. And all these parts, as you saw in the little video, were all done through this. So they just sped up a little bit. But everything in here was just modeled that kind of exact same way with these new tools. And it's a very fast pipeline. So let's see here. Let's see what else we can show. Let's do, so those are the 2 things I got through it, but we still got time left. So we're going to do something else. So this is one I kind of did yesterday. So if you guys were here yesterday, you're going to kind of see a little bit of a replay here. But it's another very cool thing that I've been messing with that just generates some interesting results. So I've just taken a 3D plane here, and I've actually just turned it into a PolyMesh 3D. So I just have this single plane generated here. And I'm actually going to reconstruct some subdivisions. I don't want that many polygons. If you guys aren't aware, even in the current version of ZBrush, you have the ability to reconstruct subdivisions. So if your model is nicely quadded and subdivided up, you can come over here and hit reconstruct, and it's going to dequad or deconstruct the actual geometry. So this allows you to come through and if something's too dense, but you know you did it on quads, you can often reconstruct it and get a lower resolution version of that actual model. So with this, I'm going to load in some textures here, and we'll see if I actually have these here. So here's some plants, and we're going to do some little plant variation here, and we're going to play with the ArrayMesh some, and then show you guys kind of the workflow of using transparencies and using the ArrayMesh to generate some interesting results on your models. So let's first come and select a little leaf here. So I actually my wife's parents have like basically a botanical garden in their yard. They have all sorts of different foliage, so I just came over and took my camera and took a whole bunch of images and then turned them into large textures. So with all these textures, I just loaded one in. So we took this little ivy kind of here. I got some nice little rough areas around the edge there. And I just have a simple plane object, and now I'm just going to apply this as a texture map to here. So I'm just going over and just click this. And by default, you're going to notice that if you have a texture map and you load it into ZBrush and it has black 000, it's going to read it as a transparent texture. We've added an addition to actually use this or harness this potential of having this kind of black areas on textures to turn them into transparencies a little bit more. So before, it would only be on and off if it was perfectly black. So if you didn't clean up your texture all that well, you may end up with like discriminating effects around the edges. But now we have a slider, and this will come through and clean up that area a little bit more. So as I scroll this here, you can see it's finding the things that are closest to that 000 or the black, and it's going to scrub them out. So as you can see, as I scrub through here, it started finding those areas and those leaves. So now I have these kind of nice holy areas on the mesh there. So another little thing there that is helping if you just need to do a quick look dev on stuff and grab some textures off the internet, but you don't have time to clean them, but you want to just use them to kind of process on your models. You can use this transparent feature, and it'll kind of clean them up for you on the fly. And you won't have to worry about opening Photoshop and making sure that entire area around the actual texture that's black is perfectly 000. So with this on here, I'm just going to quickly sculpt some deformation to this, and I'm actually going to go full screen when I do this, and then we'll send it to KeyShot in a minute. So I'm just grabbing the clay brush here. I'm going to turn on anti-aliasing to make it a little bit prettier. And I'm just going to sculpt on the model. So I'm just giving this leaf a little bit of form. So very quickly, just coming through and sculpting. And what I'm sculpting on here is that plane geometry that I just made. So I actually just have that plane geometry, and I just have a transparent texture applied to it. But it gives a nice kind of result. And if I turn on double-sided down here, underneath the display properties, and I'm going to get that back surface as well. So I can come through and start manipulating this like so. So now I have basically like a little cup kind of leaf here. So now that I have this, if you guys came by yesterday, I went through and tried to make a mangled giraffe or a mangled elephant. It didn't turn out, all that well, but you can make topiaries really easy with this. But today we're gonna go through here and we're gonna use the ArrayMesh some. So I just have the object here, and I just have this translucent texture applied to it, so I'm getting a leaf. And I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna activate array. Now with array active, I'm gonna come over here and just select transpose. And this is gonna allow me to use the transpose states inside of ZBrush here to actually deform how these offset, scale, rotate, and pivot are going to be affected. So if I want to make a few of these and just move this like so, and I've just offsetted it, and I use the actual transpose function, so it's offsetted horizontally, and you can see these sliders are updating over here. So I can also control this over here. So if I only wanted to move in the Y, and come over here and zero this out, and now it's only going to be moving in the Y in that actual array. Now this array is doing a very similar thing to the actual NanoMesh, so it's making instance geometry. So if I turn array off, this is my main mesh. If I turn it back on, I then have the option to make multiples of this, or duplicate it, or repeat it. So I'm repeating that actual option all over the place there. So this allows you to get some pretty cool kind of results. So you can come over and start playing with the actual rotate functions, and you can start getting stuff like this. And this is all just taking that actual mesh there and just arraying it across. And since this is instance geometry, your file size, when you actually save on this, is only going to save the initial one. So right now, my active points up here is reading under 300 active points, right? But I've arrayed this 300-point model, 11 times. But I could keep going with this, and you can see I can get different versions. So with this, you can come through and start manipulating, different areas here. You can change your offsets and your scales. Actually, I want the scale here. I'm going to scale this up or down. Let's go the other way. To kind of get different kind of effects and results on your model. Now with this as well, as I mentioned, all the array stuff, this transparency, all the nano stuff, it all goes to KeyShot. So we're just going to send this over to KeyShot quick. And if I go to KeyShot, you can see I now have this leaf hanging out here. Now, in the actual panel inside of KeyShot, you have a setting which will allow you to control how many of these kind of ray bounces you want to set. So right now it's set to 5. So if I kind of go sideways here and look at KeyShot, you're going to see that it's only going to give me those kind of 5 transparencies, and it's going to stop. So you want to update your ray bounces if you're using any kind of transparent textures. But now I got that in there. And so right now it's using the matte cap gray material. I sent it over in matte cap gray. So I'm actually switched to like a skin shade, so I get more of the kind of pure color of the actual leaf there. And I'm going to send that over to KeyShot again. And if you want to, inside of KeyShot, you have, since this is a texture, maybe I just want to send the texture over to KeyShot, but then I actually want to come through and apply a material surface from another material, but I want to keep the texture. So that's able to happen as well. So if I come over and say, select a paint material here, and if I actually drag the paint material on it by normal, you see it's going to replace, right? So I'm losing my texture map, and now I just have those planes. But that's not what I want. I want that texture map to be held, but I want this kind of surface qualities of this actual paint. So to do that, if you drag on your model and hold Alt, it's going to retain the actual texture information. You can see up top it says hold Alt to retain or Control to retain labels. So now when I apply this to the model here, I have that actually being applied. It's retaining my actual texture map that I sent over from ZBrush, but now it's given the properties of this paint gloss white material. Now I do have some areas that's looking a little bit faceted down here, so I can come back over to my geometry tab here. I can actually activate the dynamic subdivision, right? So if I come back to my ArrayMesh here, I'm just going to turn off ArrayMesh. So you guys can kind of see this. So I turned on dynamic subdivision, and now I can up the kind of smoothing quality here, and that's going to remove that faceting area on that mesh there. So even if I have it at that low-res state, maybe I want to keep it at that low-res state. I want to keep it at a model that has no subdivisions, but I can still have it look like it has subdivisions on it. And this all processes across the array mesh as well. So now if I send this back over to KeyShot, it's going to actually send the converted geometry version with the smooth subdivisions applied to it. So now I have a leaf here, and you can see I don't have any of that kind of faceting area happening on the back of it. So this process has been pretty interesting. It's kind of like exploration and experimenting with these different things. You can also save all these arrays out. So if you really like this leaf pattern here, I go ahead and say save this. I'm just going to throw it on the desktop here quick. And then say I want to make another kind of array object. So go back to this plane here. Let me just duplicate this guy. And since it's just a flat plane, and come here and say switch a texture map out. So let's go and grab. So which one are we going to grab now? Let's grab this little, maybe this guy. We'll grab this guy. So load this texture map in over here. And now I'm just going to come through. So right now I just duplicated that tool. So I have the same array right here. And now I'm just going to go back to the actual texture tab down here and just replace the texture with this new one. So come over here and clicking. And now you can see it's updated. And now I have it as that ivy portion, right? So now with this, if I turn on both these guys on, I have those two options there. So now I can come through and adjust one of them if I want and get a kind of a different effect. So this allows you to come through and kind of really mess with your different options here and generate some really cool designs. So I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of like plant-like creatures come out of ZBrush once we get the 4R7 out. It's just really cool, like insects and bugs I can see be generated with this process there. But that's basically the process of things I want to cover for you guys and show you.